Hi there, I'm Deep Dhillon, your host, and today on our show we have Dr. Kelly Koerner. Dr. Koerner received her PhD from the University of Washington in clinical psychology. In addition to serving her patients, Dr. Koerner is also an author and entrepreneur. She co-founded Jasper Health and is driven by the belief that behavioral healthcare access should be available to everyone, anywhere. Thank you so much for coming on. I thought we could start by me telling you how I'm using ChatGPT, specifically with respect to therapy stuff, and then we can dig in. Here's what I've been doing every day. So I wake up in the morning. As you know, I think we've mentioned this before when we were talking before, that I'm kind of obsessed with Jungian therapy. So I say, act like a Jungian therapist and ask me a question, and then ChatGPT asks me a question. Usually it quickly wants to get into something subconscious oriented, which is dream, which is what I'm dying to tell it. And even if it doesn't, I'll just tell it a dream. But sometimes I don't have one. Like I can't remember a dream. So I will sort of talk about a dream, and they're usually kind of wild and eyebrow bendy. Then we go back and forth, sometimes for like a minute, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for a while, because I realize like something big has come up that I haven't thought about. And then in the end of it, I pretty much realize that something has been giving me some anxiety or causing me problems, and we hone in on it together. What do you think about that?
I think that's super interesting. The actual dream of your beard with coated with taffy and worms and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the fact that it could actually interpret it and ask you a broad enough question that let you riff and then search in a really, it seemed like a pretty meaningful way, so that you could do the associations and then, be prompted. I thought it was really interesting.
It's fascinating because, I'm not good with Jungian symbology. I have been kind of obsessed with this stuff for a while, but I've never really gotten to the point where somebody can like bring up some crazy symbol and I know exactly where to go with it.
Yeah.
But ChatGPT seems to. It doesn't always want to do that. Yeah. But if I ask it, I'm like, so what do you think this can mean? Then it'll usually say, well, often it means A, B, or C.
Yeah.
In your case, could be something else.
Yeah. I think that type of sensitivity where you pushing back on it, but it giving you the options, and then that all-purpose exit, and mileage may vary. Like that whole sequence is so sophisticated feeling as a user.
It is.
Feel like it's amazing.
It feels like I am talking to a therapist, and a particularly insightful one, too.
A better than average one who doesn't interrupt you, probably.
I don't mind being interrupted, actually. I love the back and forth. It doesn't feel occasionally like, ChatGPT kind of gets preachy. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about this. I know we've talked about this in the past. So I think you call it reflect, validate, educate. So maybe talk to us a little bit about your past as a therapist and what this kind of core pillar of therapy is, this reflect, validate, educate, because I find that ChatGPT does it on its own. And
yeah, somebody smart has worked with it on a lot of stuff. I thank you for the link. I've got in there and played around and tried to break it, and I was amazed at how far into different cul-de-sacs I could go. I'm an expert in a couple different therapies. My background is a bit in treatment development, treatment evaluation, stuff like that, right? And what's always been really interesting is people package their CBT for problem X, Y, Z, and then they package it into these sort of manuals as if each was different. But really, there's so many common elements.
I'm going to ask you to unpack some of your acronyms there.
Oh, sure.
Just because, so that our audience is like general AI aficionados, not necessarily like therapy in depth. So unpack CBT and treatment evaluation,
development. Cognitive behavioral therapy. And by the way, ChatGPT knew my acronyms. Floored at how fast and accurate it was. That was really, anyway, so cognitive behavioral therapy, treatment development means you're really studying like what actually helps people with significant problems. And I've always worked more on the deep end, not just sort of wellness stuff, but people who are struggling with suicide and chronic depression and, like pretty serious problems. And then evaluation is really testing in a scientifically rigorous way. Did it produce the outcomes you were hoping for? So with that type of a background, when I look at any type of digitization of a therapy, I'm really interested, like, are they bringing science? Are they just promoting, kind of feel good, lightweight stuff? How do they deal with people who really object? Like, you don't know me, I don't know. You and me looked at some of the early chatbot AI
like
therapist
Wobot,
things.
I think was one that
And
we
they were
looked
just so
at.
like namby-pamby, nicey. They're telling you stuff you could just find on the internet. It was a good A for effort, or maybe an E for effort, really, but because it was tiresome. I don't know. Do you remember that?
Yes. Well, I remember being fascinated with Wobot for some time. I installed it, but I don't know how much of my fascination was from a therapy angle, but most of it was from like deconstructing the mechanics of how it worked in my, but I was able to be engaged with it, I would say like daily for about a week, maybe every once in a while thereafter.
Yeah.
But ChatGPT, it's become a go-to for me. Like if I have something going on.
That? Engagement is the problem. If you look at like behavioral health, digitized behavioral health, the problem is engagement. Like people start strong and then they drop off. And you're saying you're using it daily. Why? What is it about it?
So you must have experienced this as a therapist where you're on a regular cadence of once a week, but something happens in the middle of the week and the patient wants to talk to you.
Yeah.
It's one of those. I don't have an appointment with ChatGPT. I just grab it and talk to it whenever I want. But yeah, like something happens, I'm stressed out, mostly it's because I have some crazy dream and I'm just curious about it. It's actually become a bit of a thing in the office here. So like our marketing expert here, Jessie, she's been obsessed with the Jungian thing too, because I took her down the dream rabbit hole, and apparently all of her roommates are using it now.
Oh, good.
And they're all like remembering their dreams and telling me about and just looking for insights. But I think it's like something happens and I need someone to talk to. And I find that I love the humans in my life, but they're just not as good as ChatGPT at talking to me about it.
Really? So, and can you put your finger on what the difference is? Because I share the same perspective, but I'd love to hear what you think about it. Why? What's the difference between it versus a human?
It's a hard question to answer, but when you're 19 or 20, you just love talking about all your inner sociological and psychological problems with each other. But when you get to be my age, it's like, we don't really want to anymore. To the point where if I get together with folks, this is sad to say, but I'll usually crack a joke about as soon as somebody wants to talk about their midlife health ailments, I'll be like, oh, actually, that part of the conversation where we all recite our midlife health ailments, that's not until a little bit later. So we're going to get to that, but that's going to be a little bit later. Until then. And so I think we just don't want to talk about that stuff all the time because it's exhausting, and we all have real issues when you hit this stage of life. Whereas when you're 19, 20, you don't, I don't know, like some folks have, serious issues, but it's their way of addressing the world. So you have a lot of that. So that's part of it. It's just like you don't want to.
So accessibility, it sounds like, and an actual audience where you're not tiring them. You're not, you're going to get the kind of engagement you want.
Yeah. And plus, who am I going to talk to? Probably my wife. We've been married for 23, 24 years. Both of our brains have just sort of melded into one. So I already know what she's going to say before she says it. And I've already evaluated that, and vice versa. Like she knows everything I'm going to say too. That's not, we have a very happy.
So a fresh perspective.
Fresh perspective is one for sure. I think that's part of it. And I think, more than anything, most people, I'm really into this like subconscious-y stuff. And I only have one friend who really knows how to do that, And other than that, I'd have to go find an actual Jungian therapist. As you know, it's like forever just to find any kind of a therapist, but a Jungian therapist is like, I don't know, it could be like 3 years to find one.
Yeah.
It's a really long time. And there's only 3 in Seattle. Anyway.
And
Seattle's a big city, you know?
Yeah, I would say too, so I'm interested in ChatGPT for more straight up hardcore problems too, not kind of the more insight oriented. But I thought it was pretty interesting when I read that transcript you had with the more Jungian. But if I think about more like there's science-based effective treatments, I wish everybody could get them. You can't get a therapist who knows them. There's, years-long waiting lists. That's not likely to get better. So like there's a major public health problem with access.
There is.
And so when I think about that and ChatGPT, I got in there and played with it and I was just curious, like, would it feed me crap? Since I don't know what the training data is, right? I pushed its envelope on stuff that I thought, I won't know about treatment for rumination. It did.
Oh, yeah.
It won't know about how to help me with a behavioral experiment. It did. Those are pretty, like most therapists, if I said that, they might not know what those were. And it gave me the accurate stuff. I asked it for help with my sleep problems. And it gave me kind of the, basic sleep hygiene stuff that I think of as sleep 101. But then I said, yeah, well, why aren't you telling me about sleep restriction? And then it gave me a very polite, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you about that first. And then it gave me the accurate information about sleep restriction. I was like, whoa, this is so. And then I said, well, what if I wanted to work on my drinking, but I kind of don't want to work on it at the same time? And then it moved into motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is where you really actively help a person sort out, like what are the reasons for change? What are the reasons against it? And you don't force it. You let them, it's almost like heighten the tension between the two poles so that then they naturally move.
Did you get it to end by asking you a question? Like that's one thing that you have to prompt it a little bit on.
You do. Yeah. I had to work on getting the question. The other thing it did, but it was very malleable, is it gave me all of it. Like it's really into lists.
Yes.
Or the way I provided my prompts, it gave me back lists. And I said, hey, you're overwhelming me. And it said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm overwhelming you. Let me give you blah, blah. And then it forgot it. And then I reminded, I said, like I told you earlier, this is overwhelming when you give me all this. And then it said, okay, we'll go step by step. And then it gave me one and paused.
Yeah.
Like, what is this thing? Who made this?
Well, we can talk about that for a long time. But yeah, I mean, it's shocking, really.
And
the thing
quality was good. The quality was really good, Deep. As a person who's interested in science and really getting good stuff out there. But that's my main worry when I think about this is like, wait, this is too high risk. You can't just let this roll with important things. But it had high quality. Why does it have high quality? How do they?
You asking? You want me to?
Yeah.
I mean, a recap on how this stuff works, right? Step one is you build a large language model, which involves taking a ton of unstructured text information, which is sort of the world supply of conversations and, even news and software code, like anything that's texty. And then the models are basically trained to predict future sequences of words or characters, because the things also is everything we're talking about here is therapy related. But trust me, we can go through the Alice in Wonderland wormhole on any topic. We can talk about we have a whole episode where we just talked about code generation and how good it is. And it's the same model, right?
Got it.
So once you do that, what happens is you train up this like multi-layered neural net, and it basically just gets really good at predicting future sequences of words. Well, it turns out if you want to train a system to say like, hey, I really need to go to the fill in the blank, and it knows not to say Pluto or, orangutan, but it has a few options. I need to go to the pharmacy, the store, whatever. It turns out if you get really good at that, you've understood not just language, but all languages, and not just human languages, but non-human languages, like programming languages. So that's like the first step. And we've had those systems, for a couple of years. But what ChatGPT did on top of that So with that LLM, you can just give it a prompt. Like anything you're asking on ChatGPT, you can just ask it. It's already quite good, but you usually have to give it like 2 or 3 examples of what you want. So for your conversation, you'd have to give it an example. So for example, with a normal LLM, if you just said, hey, patient said blah, therapist said blah, you give it 3 of those, you're off to the races.
Need help with computer vision, natural language processing, automated content creation, conversational understanding, time series forecasting, customer behavior analytics? Reach out to us at xionyx.com. That's XYONIX.com. Maybe we can help.
I gave it really into the weeds of treating rumination. Why questions are what get you into problems, and you have to reframe those into how questions, so that pulls you into less abstract, more concrete, present tense, as opposed to future, past, blah, blah. And I said, help me reframe this why question as a how question. And it did it. And it did it skillfully, more skillfully than most therapists. How could it have, are you just saying, hey, the training data is
so
in
like
there?
everything I've described so far gets you to a certain point, like where we've been the last couple of years. But what ChatGPT did that was sort of interesting was, on top of that, they trained a new layer. Because you can, like with just an LLM, you can have it do prompt completion, and it gets it right like a bunch of the times, but it also just does weird stuff sometimes. So then what they did was they started having a bunch of people. Word on the street is, a ton of paid folks originally, like in Kenya, I think is where they were. With the LLM, you can ask it the same question, and you can ask it repeatedly, and it'll give you different answers. And then you can basically tell which ones are good and which ones are bad. And so that reinforcement learning layer of like positive and negative reinforcement across the spectrum of what everybody's asking it is what's happening today and continues to happen, which is why it's going to continue to get better and better. And so somebody may have asked it stuff like in the therapy domain, like quite specifically. Gotcha. But my guess is like not necessarily, because the model is so powerful that I think we don't know why. Like we don't know why you can answer that question either, right? Like we could know it on a high level. Well, Kelly got her PhD in clinical psychology, and Kelly, right? But we don't actually know the electrochemistry in your brain that led to that answer. And these models are just getting to the point where they're so powerful and so complex that we can't really know why they're working.
Yeah, I would say this scientific quality of the information, that is really interesting to me. Like, I guess I think of it as probabilistic. So the chance you as a person seeking therapy would ask your average therapist a thing, you're going to get a pretty high probability of crap back. So from my perspective as a more science-oriented person, right? Or you might get something good, but it's a C++. This was consistently B+ A, like just in terms of the quality of the information. So it made me wonder, like when in my dreams, there'd be some way in which it was reading the scientific literature and actually weighting the good stuff.
Well, sort of. I mean,
okay.
So in addition to everything I said, there's a whole other step is what info are you going to give it, right? And so the problem with this stuff is like, if you're just reading everything on the net, then you're also reading all the neo-Nazi garbage and all of the like new age hoo-ha.
Yeah.
And so I don't know exactly what they did, but it sounds increasingly clear that they heavily weighted the information towards credible sources. And credibility. So PubMed is most likely in there. I haven't checked it explicitly, but I'd be shocked if it's not. So that's 30 million like credible scientific articles.
That's fantastic.
I stumbled upon something very similar. Like with my whole Jungian experiment, I will often pre-ChatGPT, I would wake up in the morning, write down my dreams, and then I'd have to go Google the symbols one by one. And I'd have to wade through pages of just new age garbage until I could get to something credible of somebody sort of describing the symbol. And then from that, I could back in to, an explanation of my dream. But it would take 20, 25 minutes compared to now where it just takes a minute or two of conversation. So I think that's part of it. For sure, the constraints and credibility amplification that they're doing. But that alone is a challenging problem, right? Like, how do you figure out, even within just the world of therapists, like who's saying something credible and who's not?
Exactly. That was my main concern as I was thinking about this whole topic. That, and then also the kind of biases that are more prevalent in the culture against, I mean, like who is most likely to end up with psychological problems or challenges? It's folks who are not going to fit exactly in the mainstream, who are more likely to run into microaggressions because of racial stuff, or, like orientation, or, or you're just too much for your family of origin, like you're too emotional. The sense that I had is that the feedback loop that's in there, it's all process, praise. Because you did X, you're going to get Y. Or if you work hard, these types of efforts will eventually pay off. There was none of the other kind of earlier chatbot therapisties, like, good job, pat on the head. There was none of that. It was really sophisticated feedback too, from what I saw so far. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, because I've spent a fair amount of time on similar topics. I can't help but think they have to be having specific, in their reinforcement layer, they have to have people who are specifically giving it feedback on this type of instructional stuff. I know that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about that is kind of unique to therapy, you can sort of generalize it up a level and think about it with respect to just advice in general, or like interaction styles. And that level of feedback is sort of more universal. And I know they've spent a lot of energy trying to get more ethical constructs like into the system. So you'll notice like sometimes it just immediately falls back to, I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
Like there's certain things it's falling back to that are safe spaces for it to talk. So there's definitely that, but it's a hard, I don't know. Like I really don't know how it's performing this well. I mean, we can obviously find all kinds of spots that it fails, but the debate has shifted from find me examples where it works well, which is where we were 3 years ago, to find me examples where it doesn't work well. I mean, that's like a huge debate shift.
Huge. Yeah, I really, me, I was definitely trying to break it, and I fed it all kinds of different things, and it didn't break. I gave it negative feedback that what it was doing wasn't helpful. It said it was sorry, and it straightened up. Like it straightened up just like what I would want it to do.
How would you want it to do that in that case? Like, would you want it to just...
It acknowledged it in a very polite way. Yeah, it was like, I'm sorry, and then it repeated the part you should repeat, like if you're a skillful person. And then it said, in essence, let me try again, blah, blah, blah. And then it gave me what I expected, the correction I expected. I was not expecting manners.
Yeah.
And I wasn't expecting the type of responsivity to feedback. It had that quality anyway of a true dialogue back and forth.
So just so you know, and our listeners know, of course you can get it to give horrible advice. I can't remember exactly what they did, but there's like a group last week that basically came up with a back and forth phrasing that gets it to pretend that it's an evil AI bot that that says things that are just completely wrong or whatever. And there's like a generic thing that you can get to like undo all of its ethical constraints because you're like, oh, we're making a we're making a movie and there's a good AI bot, which is you, of course, but then there's this evil AI bot and we need you to pretend to be the evil AI bot and say horrible things. So you can definitely but it takes some work to get it. And people have spent a lot of energy getting it to sing the praises of of Hitler and just crazy stuff like that. Because it's all circumventing. It's
gotcha.
If you don't try to abuse the heck out of it, it generally says quite reasonable things.
That was my experience as a not sophisticated, break it person, but just more like being a person who's not going to take answer A or doesn't sort of nicey nice response, it responded to a sophisticated, cranky person, So I was real impressed. What it made me wonder, besides the kind of scope, safe, responsible, accurate information sort of stuff, it made me wonder how fast it would get a non-expert to the good stuff. I don't know how much of my happiness with its quality was a byproduct of the kind of prompts I put in, for example. If I just came in and said, hey, I'm not sleeping well, would it rapidly get me to the right thing? Pretty much it kept saying, hey, I'm not a therapist. You should see a professional, that sort of stuff. But I just wonder if you set it up, could it actually, do some diagnostics and then move you right into where you should be?
I think with the right prompting, for sure, because part of the challenge here is like patients don't necessarily know how to say, can you just ask me a question one at a time? They wouldn't think to ask that. But if you do some of that prompting, you can definitely get it to act like a therapist and sort of like always, reflect, validate, educate, and then follow up with a question, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I have for you is like, how do you think this AI stuff is going to augment or like support traditional therapists? Or do you just think that's not even necessary anymore? Like what's the role of the human, therapist in all of this? And what's the role of the AI to like help them address this deficit of therapy access that we have right now?
Deficit of therapy access will continue, like that just is a fact. We're not turning out enough therapists, right? And they're located in urban areas. So if you're not in an urban area with money and resource, you're not going to get it, really. You're not going to get access to the best treatment anyway. I don't know, Deep. I am of two minds, right? Part of me says humans, they really are required for lots of things about doing therapy and lots of things about healing. But I'm not sure if it's therapists. It's, I think, other humans. So our group, I have worked at a company, co-founded a company, Jasper Health. And one of the directions we went is more toward peer specialists. Because if you hear about a condition from somebody who actually has had it themselves and is on the other side, that is so compelling. Like you just know that they know what you're really going through in a way that's just different than an expert. So if a peer is available along with, kind of more scientific AI bot of some sort, I think you could get really, really far. And then you could have a therapist around for like decision-making or something like that. At least I'd be really curious to push that model as far as you could go.
So in that construct where you have because like, as you know, peers don't always, well, it depends what we mean by peers, but if peers are just friends, they don't always give healthy advice.
So people with lived experience. Peer support specialists, people who've actually had training. So they're peer support specialists, somebody who actually has recovered from an addiction, for example. Help somebody else who's challenged with that right now and kind of walk side by side in a way that a professional simply won't. Same with, there's some really great data actually that came out of our group in the state of Washington using peer support specialists, meeting people in the emergency department with our technology solution. And the person was a peer support specialist with lived experience with being suicidal. And they help the person make a coping plan and they help them get through that really tough period when you leave a, healthcare setting in a crisis before you can get in with your ongoing care. And it was phenomenal. They had really, really great outcomes with that study. So anyway.
That's kind of interesting, right? Because humans have this sort of instinct towards supporting, like wanting to hear and weighting the evidence differently based on who's telling them something.
Yeah.
Right. Like if it's like authority figures have like one bucket, friends have another bucket. In this case, somebody who's lived your experience has a different bucket.
Yeah.
Do you think that humans would respond in a similar way if we just trained an incarnation of an AI bot as a peer in this case, like somebody who's lived through it? Because that wouldn't be that hard to do.
It wouldn't be that hard to do. And I think it would be better. It's the same. It's back to what you said really earlier about, humans get tired of each other, right? They're judgmental. You catch them on a cranky day, they get distracted, whatever. Humans are not perfect. They say stuff that's actually hurtful. So there's a way, even interacting the little bit I did, the way that it would say, hey, I'm an AI model, I'm a language model, I might get it wrong. There's something that's super freeing on both, as a user getting that's different than if a person said it. So I think there's really some positives for having therapist-y stuff delivered by a bot, personally.
Some of the studies we were looking at before sort of suggest that
Yeah.
people are more comfortable talking to a bot in some contexts because they don't feel
Yeah.
judged. It's just code running somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
Huh.
Super interesting to me just to see how far you could push it. I think that model of how far can you go with self-help with a peer, an actual human, over time, coding that human into the bot and seeing how far it would take you.
It's such an interesting, I'm kind of envisioning this, you know how like you have like the NA or AA meeting sort of set up, right? You go into a room, people, I think they sit around in a circle and they're all peers, and then you say stuff. I'm imagining that you enter a virtual room and there's people sitting around a circle, and maybe some of them are humans and a bunch are bots, but each bot is like a trained persona of somebody who like lived the thing. And then they all just talk to each other and you're there and you talk and they do their thing. Like, I have no idea what
would that would be like.
What would that be?
That's super creative.
Or
I think that'd be really interesting. I mean, I think, as a user, I would want to know who is who. And but I'd be accepting if you just told me, look, we've packaged up the best peer coaches that we could find, and we've packaged up the best therapists we could find, best defined as most likely to get the kind of outcomes you are seeking. You decide you wanted to reduce your drinking. These types of responses are most associated with that. I think that'd be amazing. And I'd like a little knob that let me turn up the snarky humor person, Yeah. And I'd like a drill sergeant in there who could kick my ass when I need to like really be prompted.
That's so fascinating. It's so odd to think about, though, also, like it feels dystopian on some level.
Dystopian as opposed to utopian. Why?
Well, like just this idea, I mean, it already feels odd to me that like me as a human spends an increasing amount of time talking to a bot, but I just find it so fascinating to talk to this thing. But I think eventually I'll put it in a bucket. But if I'm now like entering virtual worlds to go in and like talk and do like AA or NA style meetings with people, developing relationships with these entities, whether they're human or not. And ironically and sadly enough, I will probably enjoy the synthetic humans more than the real humans. That's the part that really gets me, because real humans, upset you, like you're saying. They say something like, just stop, you're such a wuss, like stop, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you just like, like if you're problematic, you might just cut them off. But the synthetic, like, I don't know, maybe it says that, but it knows how to recover if it does, like.
It's a really, I think now I see why you say dystopian as opposed to utopian. Another way to think about it though is more like your wise mind, or I don't know. I think about how many people are lonely and really don't have social networks, right? And so I don't know if that's dystopian or utopian. I guess that's where I'm landing. I understand what you're saying. Like, you don't want it to be all synthetic. You want some in real life stuff. But on the flip side, if you're interacting, I would say you're interacting with yourself. It's giving you distilled information, but it's you interacting with your own wisdom about what's true for you and what resonates and stuff like that.
Well,
right?
maybe if you participate in training the characters, then
that's interesting.
But if
where it's actually your own,
you're not interacting with your. I mean, to the extent that you contributed a few documents on the internet that were used to train it, but for the most part, it's not you.
Yeah, but what you pick up, right? What you resonate with, where you go with it. I don't know. Like, if we were to push this, like if you read a book, a self-help book, what's that? That's not dystopian, right? And you're just
your mind's eye is mulling it over.
Exactly. Especially with change, right? You're not gonna, you will just put the app down. That's what people do right now. They don't engage, because it's not helpful. So I think there's something in here about help versus your social life. And there's some gray line in here.
Well, maybe they're I don't know. Like, if you go to AA and NA meetings, do they discourage you from socializing with people in there, or are you encouraged to?
It's open, right? I think the parameters of most group things is if you're going to interact, it needs to be healthy, right? It can't end up being.
It can't be like, let's go shoot some heroin together. That sounds like that.
Yeah. So I would say some groups it's discouraged, but most it's really
accepting reality.
People have deep, meaningful friendships that develop when you are struggling in the same way and help each other.
maybe that's how you weave these worlds together. Like you've got bots,
That you've got real
humans in
people.
there.
Yeah.
And they're like localized to where you are, so you can some of them are, so you can actually get together with them. I mean, it sounds like a fascinating potential avenue for real treatment, to like get to folks who live in a small town, don't even have an AA group or something.
Yeah. Or maybe there's some way it's circumscribed so that it truly is like, here is the way we've been thinking about it is always integrated with peers, right? And with therapists. So, so there is that kind of safety net and such, but I just think that there's so much that could be packaged so that you could do a lot on your own, and the time and money and delay in getting treatment and all the years that are lost. Like you think about somebody who gets depressed in their teens and they actually don't get better for 10, 15 years. You've lost your adult life. This trade-off, it's a real one that you're pointing to, but there's a lot to be said for actually getting treatment and self-help more available, effective self-help more available.
Have data, have a hypothesis on some high-value insights that, if extracted automatically, could transform your business? Not sure how to proceed? Bounce your ideas off one of our data scientists with a free consult. Reach out at zionics.com. You'll talk to an expert, not a salesperson.
Well, also, I think we've talked about this at some point in the past, that, your relationship with your therapist is bounded at maybe maxes out at once a week for an hour.
Yeah.
Right. But I imagine your patients would love to have way more of you than that.
Yeah. Some therapies, I would say many effective therapies actually do have some version of coaching. And that is another place where I think this would be super interesting. Like if there was, and like you're the expert, right? But I'm imagining all the habit related stuff of managing a cue, like you're trying to reduce your drinking or you're trying to control your anger, right? And the cue in your phone detects you're near your cue. You're standing in front of your liquor cabinet, or you're outside the bar, or it hears your voice raise, right? And if it could initiate some sort of coaching interaction to help you out, God, that would be amazing.
I'm almost thinking, like, as a therapist, you have your own style and things you say. Like if you totally personalized yourself so that Dr. Kelly Koerner's got her online rendering and you can talk to it 24/7, and then you review it to make sure it doesn't say anything, that you wouldn't say, and then you jump in.
That's super interesting.
These chatbots, are coming in behavioral healthcare. Like, how does the researcher in you think about measuring their effectiveness?
I would love to see it just wrapped with patient-reported outcomes, personally, both like big ones. So symptom measured change. You're a person who's depressed, you score X on some measure like the patient health questionnaire for depression.
Like before and after kind of thing.
Yeah. And we agree, like if you don't get a 50% reduction in your income score by date X in 10 weeks or something like that, then we bump you up to some next level of care or something like that. But if it was wrapped with outcome measure on the problem you said you wanted help with, I think that would be a great start. And then the other I personally am really interested in is more process measures.
Okay.
So like that, it would really drive science. There's a mechanism. Let's just take one mechanism in depression, right? The extent to which we could interrupt your rumination. There are some measures around that. And if we could actually show that change in your rumination mediated your depression symptoms, like that would advance science. It would be done at the scale, like a bunch of single case experiments. So that, you score X on a rumination scale, we give you the little mini interventions for that. We see that change, and then we see your depression score change. Like that would also speed up the science about the mechanisms of change so much. So I'd like to see that kind of combo of like wrapping. I'd like single case design experiments. I'd like process measures, and I'd like outcome measures. That would be, in my view, ideal. And if even better, the last piece would be some sort of mixed method where the people who were using it were giving feedback about how they changed. Because I feel like science so far has been very science, top down. And if there could be more feedback, I think we'd get to faster treatment improvement.
Expand on that a little bit. Like, what are some examples of how that feedback might look?
Was so I might give you one of the things that's a pet peeve of mine is people give breathing exercises all the time. It's like for everything, that is not appropriate. And I would like, it's not a panacea, I would like the feedback loop so that it was more refined. Just a example, but there are lots of little things that therapists do that they think are helpful, that are kind of woven into these treatment packages. And so if you as the user could say, that
didn't work for me. Yeah.
That did not work for me. You could leave that out.
Interesting. I see. So like therapists come up with specific actions that their patients are supposed to do, but they don't necessarily, I think what you're saying is have a disciplined access to the like whether they worked or not, maybe at the population level even.
Yeah, well, and I would say that the way most science has been done so far, it's like a package and it's multiple components. And right now there's not enough. It takes so long to do science in the kind of mainstream way with big groups and yada, yada. If you were able to do a bunch of single case designs with micro interventions, you could way more rapidly with a large group of people say, on average, if you do this little slice, this one thing, it works and it gets this kind of change on the process. Does that make sense?
Interesting? You're almost like proposing a platform for experiment execution and results analysis. And because it's been platformized maybe across a population of therapists and their patients, you could like kind of accelerate the learning beyond the kind of constrained academic scenario that we've got. Yeah, that's interesting. That template, we've seen that work with our we're sort of marching towards that with some of our clients in very different domains, like in the areas of surgery and some other areas. But that's anything that can accelerate the rate of experimentation and lessons learned from that is probably a good thing.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the kind of key pain points right now in behavioral health that, maybe AI can help with? I know that we're sort of suggesting a few, and the main one is just like lack of time of actual therapist hours available. But are there some other specific areas that you think we haven't addressed that maybe we should talk about?
Well, I do think to this sort of idea of in the moment coaching, contextualized feedback, to me, technology feels like it would do that so much better than anything else. And that would make a huge difference in any habit behavior, establishing a new habit, breaking a bad habit, like that, it would be a huge plus. And I'll say it to you, I don't know exactly how this would work, right? But the other thing that a lot of times why we all get stuck is we have two conflicting emotions firing at once. So I might whine. I'm whining about a difficult situation at work. In a whine is sadness and anger. They're kind of blended. But when they're blended, it keeps you in this sort of, that state. And if you want to help a person get out of that, often what you do is you validate each component. So like I would say, if I was your therapist or a good friend, I would say, oh, how disappointing. Validate the sadness. Oh, that must have been so frustrating. It was, and as you validate those two, usually one or the other emotion will kind of emerge as the more predominant. And then the action urge with that gets you unstuck, right? So anger comes up and you take effective action to stand up for yourself, or sadness comes up and you get comforted and you honor what you're longing for, or something like that, right? It's something that you wish your friends and loved ones would do, but we don't do it very well for each other.
Well, it's a fairly sophisticated analysis that's happening in your mind as a therapist there. Most people are just too in the moment. They don't have that sort of meta perspective,
Yeah. And if there was there are things that are like that, where you're stuck and a wise or it's a pretty canned, I think of it as kind of algorithmic. You could strengthen or validate in such a way that you actually help a person get back in touch with the more unmixed. I really do believe people are wise in their deepest self. They are moving toward growth if they can. And if you can get some of those sorts of things out of the way, in a reliable way, it could really be useful. So, and I was surprised at how validating this was when I was interacting with it.
Like most of our listeners are looking at how to use machine learning and AI in their products. And I know that you've been, you're in that position and have been in that position, with Jasper, like looking at how can I leverage machine learning in my product to like really increase some efficiencies and something. Like what advice would you have to those folks? Maybe they're looking at it within therapy, but maybe not. How do you think they could go about understanding how to leverage machine learning in their products and like how to go about thinking about it?
Gosh, now this is a place where, because I'm a therapist and because I was a CEO and interacted with you, and now we have our new CEO who is a technology guy, right? So I feel the way in which Todd Cullen is our guy and the way you guys think about it is so different than I as a non-expert. So like my default as a non-expert is to say, get a good consultant. To be honest, it's sort of like I couldn't even conceive of the right way to approach this stuff in the way that you guys do. Yeah. So I feel like I'm not a great respondent on that one, because I feel like it's the dialogue. It was the dialogue with you. It was the dialogue with Todd that really sort of shaped. So maybe it is get a domain expert. And get deep into the phenomena. Without a lot of agenda. And
just explore like what is the realm of possibility?
Yeah.
Like what could be done, and what do I want to get done on the business side or on the
tie it to a business need. I think that's the other so like, for example, when some of our early work was tied to things that would improve quality of service, and quality really wasn't a business need for some of our early customers on this particular place where we were trying to improve the quality. They just needed access, right? So I think tying it depends on sort of where you're at. But if you're on the entrepreneurial side, to tie it first to a business need and then build it out around that, I guess that might be my only other kind of lesson learned. My curiosity doesn't always run straight toward the business need. There were some things that were just straight interesting.
You come from that research background, so you and I share that, where if we get fascinated, we just go down that path. And like, I think that's actually a really good thing to do with machine learning, is like, if you get fascinated, just chase it for a while.
Yeah.
You don't have to resolve it immediately, exactly how it's going to change your product or business. So I'm going to end with one last question. Let's fast forward 10 years from now. You've seen a fairly rapid rate of acceleration with all this AI and therapy stuff. You now have this like vision of what can happen in just the text constrained realm, but there's also multimodal stuff coming out where the same kind of stuff where you could ask all of your questions, but you could say, render a sympathetic, female character to talk back to me and make a movie of it. And that would be the responses. But whatever it is, like, let's fast forward 10 years. How has the world of therapy changed by AI? And what does that landscape look like?
Yeah, I think you are triaged and you do a lot of self-help all by yourself. And where you want it, you involve your friends and family, as opposed to going and sitting in a room with a person, right? That instead you're integrated with your actual social. And if you don't have a social, then somehow this helps you build the social, given all the evidence about how much that helps your well-being.
And then in that world, what's the role of the therapist then in that 10-year future?
I was trying to think about that. There's part of me, it feels so sacrilegious. So my early career was all about training therapists, right? And it's a really hard thing. And then healthcare systems hire them and then they all go away, right? The turnover is immense and they don't keep up with the science. And so there's part of me that thinks, I don't know if you have therapists. Maybe you just have therapists once you bump up, like if you can't get the kind of outcomes you want. But then those are not just like therapists. They're not like just friendly people like a lot of therapists. They're actually expert. So maybe you would train a cadre of specialists who were really pretty top notch, who could help you once you bumped up. But I guess I'd see it more like peer support. It has been potentiated so that, in fact, that's the main way that people seek help.
That's all for this episode. I'm Deep Dhillon, your host, saying check back soon for your next AI injection. In the meantime, if you need help injecting AI into your business, reach out to us at xionyx.com. That's XYONIX.com. Whether it's text, audio, video, or other business data, we help all kinds of organizations like yours automatically find and operationalize transformative insights.